There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst.
Good morning, Living Word. How you guys doing? And welcome Life Center. I stopped there earlier at the service, see what was going on over there. Hope you guys are having a really good service, and welcome also to everybody joining us by live stream. Hey, Super Bowl Sunday, and yes, we have the big game showing tonight. It's going to be great. They actually upgraded the quality of the, so I think it's high def, so it should be a really, really great experience. I did a little bit of research for what are a couple fun facts about Super Bowl Sunday. Do you know that there's only one other day of the year when Americans eat more food than we do on Super Bowl Sunday? And of course, the other day is Thanksgiving, but number two is Super Bowl Sunday. We are going to eat 2 million pizzas today. Yeah, hey God. And along with that, we have 1.3 billion chicken wings. And 60% of you will dip your chicken wings in ranch sauce. That's good to know. We're gonna consume 25 million pounds of potato chips, tortilla chips, and pretzels. And in addition, Americans, we're spending $1.3 billion on adult beverages to go along with all that horrible food. Which is, by the way, while many of you don't make New Year's resolutions about dieting because you know Super Bowl Sunday is coming, so tomorrow might be a great day to start your New Year resolutions. Do you know that 11 million people have already taken a personal day, Monday, as a personal day after Super Bowl, and tomorrow 5 million more people will call in sick because they ate too much of that food and had too much of the alcohol, too much of the beverage, I should say. Anyway. And I will show up for work tomorrow on time, very promptly. If the Ravens would have been in, it might have been a different story. But next year, we'll see what happens there. Hey, anyway, thanks for being with us. We are on week number 4 of our series on the formation of character inside of us. And today, we actually are finishing up our foundational talks where we were looking at what is this thing called good and bad, and why does it matter? Why is it so easy to break bad? And today we're going to talk about becoming good and why it's a little bit difficult to become good. And then in the remaining weeks, we're going to be taking a look at individual traits, virtues that are very significant, will make all the difference in your life as those things are cultivated. So as I'm going through this, not only am I studying the scripture, but I'm also just paying attention to what are they saying out there in the world and lots of different ways about this thing called character. Many of you know there's a whole new movement that's been going on for probably about 20 years. It's called the movement of positive psychology. And it's a number of very well-known researchers, authors, practitioners who realized that for so long we looked at the negative side of mental health illnesses and let's just focus on that. And this group came along and said, no, let's look at the positive. And they've written some very, very significant resources. And in one of their major handbooks, just want to read a couple words from the introduction. Now, by the way, this big handbook was written in 2004, and since then they put out other things. But we now have a heightened societal concern about good character. After a detour through the hedonism of the 60s, the narcissism of the 70s, the materialism of the 80s, and the apathy of the 90s, almost everybody today seems to believe that character is important after all, and that the United States is facing a character crisis on many fronts, from the playground, to the classroom, to the sports arena, to Hollywood, to business corporations, and to politics. On many fronts, we are facing a significant character crisis. And so what these authors do and what the workbook is all about is how do we wind up looking at virtues. They have a very startling admission that I'm going to come back to a little bit later in the message. I'm also just pouring through the scriptures. What are the insights about good and bad? And if you remember, on week number 1, we actually looked at like 4 different places in the book of Romans. Paul's perhaps his most significant letter that he wrote about life in Jesus. And 4 different places where he's just using that sort of like that tension of good and bad, good and bad. But it's not unique to Paul. It's all through the Bible. In the Old Testament, there are these individuals called prophets. And a large section of the Old Testament is devoted to these prophetic, challenging words for what God has for us. And the first prophet, his name is Isaiah. And in the first chapter, Isaiah says, hey, this is part of my agenda, this thing called good and evil. And he says, stop doing wrong, learn to do right. Another translation says, cease to do evil and learn to do good. You flip through these prophets and you come to another prophet named Amos, and wow, is his letter ever just challenging verse after verse. But Amos has the same concern. The times are evil, so seek good and not evil, that you may live. Hate evil, love good. I mean, these things, and they just appear everywhere in the Old Testament. That was like the basis and framework for the Apostle Paul to say some of the things that he said about good and evil. And one of them just being hate what is evil, cling to what is good. And of course, we also use that language that Paul wants us to be wise about the good things of life and innocent, free from the bad things. So, I mean, this stuff is just nonstop appearing through the scriptures. Now, I've got 2 questions today, and the first one's a really hard question. And in fact, the question irritates a lot of people, and when Christians make some comments about this question, that can almost become antagonistic for some folks. Here's the question, very simply. Can you and I be good without God? Is goodness possible apart from this one called God? Now, frankly, a lot of folks out there say, well, of course goodness is very possible without God, but we're going to examine that. And I'm going to wind up saying, I would have a different answer. I think the Bible would have a different answer. Can we be good without God? And by the way, I don't know about you guys, but I have God, and it's still darn hard to be good. I mean, I can't imagine trying to be good without God. It's hard enough with God. So, but what I want to do, because this question is so important, I want to give you a couple of different evidences. I want to marshal some good thoughts, and just maybe we need to say, good without God, pretty darn hard. So, back in 1994, that was when the Gen X generation was becoming prominent. Sometimes they were known as the baby busters, but Gen X was the name that they really liked. And there was one author, his name was Douglas Coupland, and he was one of the spokesmen for that generation, wrote some very, very significant novels and books to just kind of say, hey, this is who we are, and this is what's going on. One of the books that he wrote, for which he became most famous, was called Life After God. And in that book, he said, hey, here's the experiment that we Gen Xers tried. We tried to have life without God. We tried to do life apart from God. We just really didn't want this one called God to be a part of our lives. And so we wound up doing these decades-long experiments trying to live without God. And he was one of them, and he wrote the little book that was his sort of narrative about life without God. And at the end, it's on the next to last page. He has a very striking, very honest, very humble response. It'll be up there on the screen. I'm going to read a few more words. So on the next to last page, now here is my secret. And I tell it to you with an openness of heart that I doubt I shall ever achieve again. So I pray that you're in a quiet room as you hear these words. My secret is that I need God, that I am sick, and I can no longer make it alone. I need God to help me give because I no longer seem capable of giving. To help me be kind as I no longer seem capable of kindness. To help me love as I seem beyond being able to love. You see, for decades I tried to live life without God, and the result was that I can't do all those things that make humanity worthwhile. I can't give, I can't love, I can't serve, I can't be kind. I just found I can't do those things on my own. My secret is that I need God. Oh my word, what a humbling, beautiful admission. Powerful. Just a couple years before that, in 1989, there was a very provocative, it became one of the most widely read, disseminated articles in the Atlantic Monthly, and the title of the article was, "Can We Be Good Without God?" Now imagine that as the title of a major essay in basically a secular journal, "Can We Be Good Without God?" And it was written by a political scientist named Glenn Tinder, and he was a teacher at a major university up in New England, and he had a really grave concern on him that as he was looking at this thing called the United States of America, our political order, our social order, he believed that there had been an original worldview that was deeply imprinted by Christianity about so many important things. And as we were increasingly decoupling God from the way that we would do life, he wondered, can we still remain good? Can we be good? Can we be politically good, socially good, culturally good apart from God? And he went through an amazing article. It was very, very intellectual. And his whole conclusion was, no, without God, we will not be able to sustain the goodness of this thing called America. Now, boy, you can bet that raised a firestorm of response, but wow. Later on, he wrote another book called The Political Meaning of Christianity, and he's saying, here's what Christianity has contributed to this whole thing about how we do life together. Different authors saying, good without God, it is really, really hard, and maybe it's not even possible. Okay, I want to playfully use one particular illustration. I'm just going to pick one little segment of life, and let's see how easy it is to be good in that one particular area. And it's about our health. It's about how healthy we are as Americans. And I think most of us would agree, hey, it's good to be healthy. To be healthy is good. And I don't think we disagree with that. I don't think anybody here says, oh, no, to be as unhealthy as you can, that's good. Of course, we don't believe that. We believe that good is good to be healthy. So how are we doing on our quest to be good and healthy? Well, in last year, the United States Department of Health and Human Services released a study just about one thing called exercise. And here's what they meant by exercise, that 5 times a week, we spend 30 minutes doing something that gets our heart rate elevated. And here's what they said, if you do a brisk 30-minute walk, that counts as exercise. So listen, we're not talking ranger level training. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, can you do a brisk walk 5 times a week for 30 minutes? That's what they said would qualify. And they found that only 20% of Americans even qualify for doing 5 times 30 minutes of exercise a week, only 20% of us. Well, here is the really bad news. Of that 20%, 50% were ages 18 to 24, which means that by the time we get to 25, there are almost none of us doing what we know to be healthy, and that is exercising for 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week. Almost 90% of us are not doing that. Now listen, I think we all know that it's good, and all the research says it's good to do that, but the fact is 90% of us find it very hard to do even a minimal exercise 5 times a week. So yeah, it's pretty hard to be healthy, isn't it? And by the way, we're all in this one together. We're just we're all in this together. 2016, the Mayo Clinic, they did something a little more substantial. They said, let's just ask how healthy are Americans. And I'm going to tell you in a moment what the 4 criteria were, but as they did their study, they said only 3% of Americans qualify as healthy. By the way, a year later, a global study was done, and of all the advanced nations on planet Earth, the United States came in number 17 of 17 in terms of health. So, only 3% of Americans were considered healthy in the study. What ridiculously high standards did they have that only 3% of us achieved? Well, here they are. Back to that, well, first of all, you exercise 5 times a week for 30 minutes a day. You got for a brisk walk. Okay, there's a few more. That you have reasonable nutrition. Now, by the way, they were not creating these like weird paleo diets and Atkins diets and all this kind of crazy stuff that we look at that and just shudder in horror even thinking about having to do those things. You know, they were just saying some basic nutritional things that we all know. And how few people did that. And then they said, and then plus you have a reasonable body mass index. That is, how much body fat are you carrying? They had, again, reasonable standards that were just out there. And you don't smoke. And they said, look, those are the 4 criteria. We said, if you meet these things, then you will be considered healthy. And only 3% of us met those 4 standards. Look, apparently it's really, really hard to be healthy. And Super Bowl Sunday makes it even harder. I mean, it's really hard. Look, we know it's good to be healthy, right? But it's really hard to be good in this thing called our health. And let me just give you one more. So in 2016, the Surgeon General released a report about the number of Americans that have substance abuse problems. Now, by substance abuse, they were only two things they included. One is you have problems with alcohol, and secondly is you have problems with illegal drugs or legal drugs used wrongly. So they were the only two things that made it into their category of substance abuse. There are other substances they could have added in, but they didn't, just those two. And of those two, they said 15% of Americans have legitimate substance abuse problems. Now, they didn't say addiction, or addiction would have been a smaller percentage of that, but of substance abuse problems, 15%. 1 out of every 7 of us have a substance abuse problem. Here's what was really striking. And of that 1 out of 7, the 15% of Americans that have substance abuse problems, less than 10% will ever seek help for their problem. Man, guys, listen, it's hard to be healthy. It's really hard to be healthy. And I just picked one little part of life. I could have picked a dozen different examples and given you the statistics and the figures and the data, and behind every one of them is a story. And it's really hard to be good. I mean, let's just put that one out. It's not easy to be good. It's really hard to be good. Even on things that we know are good for us, just because we know it's good for us doesn't mean it's easy to get there. All right, let me come back now to this thing called character and virtue, and those positive psychology individuals who are really well known, some of the best reputations in our nation. So what they did is there's a movement going on. They wound up creating a very massive manual on character and virtue, and it's called, Character, Strengths, and Virtue. And in that book, they said, let's categorize these. So they developed 6 different categories, and in those categories, they loaded 24 different virtues. And by the way, if you and I were to read through that book, and I'm reading it through right now, I think for the most part, we would agree on just about every one of those virtues that they have listed. Oh yeah, that's a good virtue. Responsibility is good, yes. Integrity is good, yes. Wisdom is good, yes. Patience is good, yes. I mean, we would be in agreement about the worth of those particular virtues. But here's what they said. When I read this, did I read that right? Was that a misprint? I went back and read it a couple of times. So again, these are the experts, the world's experts on positive psychology, building good character. They said, we have to figure out what is invigorating about the good life. The experts, we have to figure out what's invigorating about the good life. In other words, we have to figure out what's even going to motivate us to want to have a good life of moral and character strength. As we have written these 24 articles, we have found ourselves sounding like bad evangelists, going on and on and on about virtue, but convincing no one, even ourselves, that these virtues are worth pursuing. Guys, did you hear what they said? The experts are writing the handbook on virtue, and they said, we haven't even figured out what's going to motivate us to want to pursue these things. And we're talking about honesty, and we're talking about dignity, and we're talking about this, we're talking about that. And even as we're talking, we sound like bad evangelists. We're just kind of railing about how good these things are, and yet we don't think we're convincing anybody. And frankly, we're not even that convinced that we ought to pursue those things. It's like this admission of profound failure of motivation to want to even become the good person that they're writing about. I mean, it's extraordinary. Now, by the way, why I like to say that is when you and I are now having our conversations, we're trying to do our life as followers of Jesus out there in the world, there are going to be times when we just get a whole lot of pushback, even about, hey, can we be good without God? Oh, of course you can be good without God. How intolerant of you Christians to say, well, listen, all I'm doing is I'm just going out there to the research of what others are saying who aren't Christians. And they're saying, my word, it is so hard to be good. In fact, we're not even sure we figured out what the motivations are to become good. Those are pretty substantial admissions by the experts. Of course, by the way, in the book they also say, and God is not a factor in any of our research. We don't believe in God. We don't believe in religion. We don't believe in spirituality. Those things are all factored out. Okay, one more thing, one more piece of evidence, but now this is going to start to transition to a little parable I want to tell, and then into a scripture that I've chosen to illuminate all of these things we're talking about today. There's a Christian researcher. He is a moral philosopher. His name is Christian Miller. And he wrote a book called The Character Gap, and the subtitle is How Good Are We? So right back to that question, about goodness. In this case, this question is not can we be good without God, but how good are we? And he is a Christian, but his profession is that of a moral philosopher. That means in all the different subjects that philosophy studies, what he is most interested in is the realm of ethics and virtue and character. And in that specialty, he has a subspecialty where he likes to study the psychologists who are studying those things. All right, and he has done amazing research. He has collected a whole team from all across the country, and they've got their little sort of like sub-movement going on of just let's study the best insights we can from the world of psychology as it is studying character. And this was the more accessible of his books about that. And so in the beginning, he's saying, let me just lay out for you the findings that we have in this book, and then we'll go into the findings themselves. So he said, the more our characters put to the test, the more we find that it is a decidedly mixed bag. So all of you sitting here, Christian Miller, say you are a decidedly mixed bag when it comes to character. He would go on, our hearts are not like morally pure. They're not exactly that they're morally corrupt, but listen to this. Our hearts are a messy blend of good and evil. Now, I'm not going to have you do what Garrett did last week, but wouldn't it be fun to just look at the person beside you and say, hey, you are a messy blend of good and evil. But that's what he's saying. I mean, that's what all the psychological research, most of it conducted by those who would not claim any religious faith, those individuals are coming to the conclusion that we are a messy blend of good and evil. It goes on and it says, it is incredibly hard to develop a good character. That's what all the research is saying. It's incredibly hard. And the obstacles in a way, they're significant. And there are no easy solutions. There are no quick fixes. Okay, now up to this point, it just sounds like the positive psychologists I just mentioned. But now suddenly it takes a turn. But all is not hopeless. And we should not give up trying. A promising path to developing good character, at least for some people, involves not just human effort, but divine assistance and initiative. What we here at Living Word like to call amazing grace, forgiving love, and the transforming presence of God. All is not lost. There is a promising alternative. Can we be good without God? Man, it is darn hard. It is darn hard. And maybe it's impossible. Let me tell you a parable. I'm going to use myself in the parable. It'll make it a little bit easier. So I went to the doctor, and I tell you, I was a wreck. I was a wreck. I was feeling bad. It had been getting worse and worse. And I get into the doctor, and I just say, doctor, I feel horrible. He takes one look at me and says, oh, my word, why did you wait so long? And right away, he orders every test you could conceive of. And for the next 2 weeks, I was prodded and probed, and I was scoped, and I was scanned, and they drew more things out of me than what I even knew I had in me. And after 2 weeks, all the results of the tests are in, and they get back to the doctor's office, and he calls me in, and I come in, and he said, Brian, I knew you were bad, but I had no idea just how bad it is. Brian, you are so bad. There is nothing that conventional medicine can do for you. It's just too late. As I'm digesting that news, he says, but there is something that conventional medicine is not talking about too much. He said, some of us know about it, and I just call it like this wondrous medicine. And he goes on and says, there was an inventor a couple of years back that this person was like brilliant. He was like a chemist, a biologist, a geneticist. He had a PhD in anatomy and physiology and nutrition. In fact, I think he had like the equivalent of 30 PhDs about everything that has to do with what it means to be a human body. I mean, he's just brilliant beyond understanding. And he spent his life creating something to take care of what was wrong with us. And took him years to do it. And he finally came up with this thing after long trials. And I just call it the wondrous medicine. I said, well, what does it do? He says, well, it does everything. He said, you drink this stuff and it actually goes to work at the genetic level of your being. It literally begins to rearrange your DNA. I said, well, how's that possible? He said, I don't know, it just does. He says it gets into your cellular level. It begins to repair cells at the most fundamental, basic place where they are. And actually, it starts to do some things to the cells that they never had before. It makes them better than they were. I said, how's that possible? He says, we don't know. He says it gets into your bloodstream. It just purifies every toxin that is in there, and it actually makes your blood healthier than it has ever been. It gets into your immune system. It gets into your immune system so that no disease can ever get in there. You become like immune and vulnerable to disease. I said, well, what about cancer? He said, oh, it cures cancer. Every known cancer there is, it cures, and as best we can tell, it makes you immune to any new cancers that might come up. I'm just thinking, my head's reeling. I said, Doc, my insides are, he says, it goes to every internal organ, and it fixes them, and repairs them, and it actually makes them better. They work better than they ever did. I said, how? He said, we don't know. It just does. So, my thinking's getting a little slow, too. Like, I'm a little more forgetful. Things are fuzzier. He says, Brian, it gets into your brain. Those neuronal pathways, those synapses. I mean, it's like it supercharges your brain. Brian, you will never have to deal with dementia or Alzheimer's or anything else again. Brian, I'm serious. It does everything. It fixes everything. Everything. Well, I asked the question I was dreading to ask. How much does it cost? Listen, I was ready to give everything if I could get that wondrous medicine, everything. And he said, Brian, it doesn't cost you a cent. See, not only was this inventor the most brilliant inventor ever, but he was a philanthropist, a humanitarian, and he spent billions. He spent every single penny he had to research and discover and create and produce and get this medicine out. Doesn't cost you a cent. And so he reaches into one of his drawers and he pulls it out and says, here it is. All you have to do is drink it. Just drink it. And I took it and I drank it right on the spot. I wasn't going to wait another minute for this wondrous medicine. Man, I started going to work right away. And I think, well, okay, great, that's over. And it said, well, Brian, there's one more thing. I knew it. There had to be a catch, right? There had to be a catch. He says, well, here's something about the way the inventor designed that medicine. I mean, it's doing what it's doing, and it's already at work, and it's going to keep on working. But he designed it in such a way that it needs, well, we just call them supplements. They're supplements. And what they wind up doing is you take one a day, and what it does is it activates this wondrous medicine. It advances it. Somehow it gets in there as a catalyst, and all this stuff that's already working wonderfully, it just speeds it up and it pushes it forward. You just have to take them one a day, every day, and don't ever stop taking them. And I said, how much do they cost? I said, here they are. They're free. Just take them one a day, every day. Now, what I have just described, every single New Testament writer would say, I have just described the work of God to save and heal, repair and renew us, and what God asks us to do in cooperative, dependent response. Every single New Testament writer would affirm that that is so. I just want to show you one, just one. And this one's going to be in your devotional guide. 2 Peter chapter 1. Listen to how 2 Peter describes the wondrous medicine called the life of Christ. In verse 1, this is what we have been given, the righteousness of our God and Savior. You don't have to try to be righteous. You can't be righteous on your own. It is given to you. A faith that's precious. It's given to you. Grace and peace, yours in abundance, they are given to you. Verse 3, his divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life. I'm not even sure the right question is, can we be good without God? I think the right question is, can we become godly good without God? And of course, how can you be godly without God? And the answer is you can't. God's not going to settle for just mere goodness, not just occasional, intermittent, sporadic on the things that you care about goodness. God is concerned about godliness, and his divine power has given you and I everything we need for a godly kind of life. And he's given us great and precious promises. And let me tell you what else has been poured into that wondrous medicine. The very life of God himself, the divine nature of God. When we partake of Christ in some mysterious way, and it is so far above my pay grade to explain, but we partake in the very divine nature of God. And we escape the corruption of evil and sin and all that is wrong in the world, all that is wrong in the world out there and all that is wrong in the world inside of us. And it's like we escape all those things. That's what the wondrous medicine that is absolutely free does for you and I. And my question for many of you here perhaps is, have you taken that wondrous medicine called Jesus? Have you just freely received all that he has poured into this thing called new life of grace and forgiveness, redemption, healing, so many good, strong words that we've forgotten what they mean, and have we just said yes to Jesus and receive him? Because listen, if you don't have the wondrous medicine, it doesn't matter how many supplements you take for the rest of your life. They don't have anything to work with. They don't have anything to work on. There's nothing for them to connect to. And in fact, that's the problem with every world system, every world alternative, every other thing that's out there, is they try to give you a supplement and you have no wondrous medicine already at work in you. And that's why the supplements don't work. And you can try the supplements for the rest of your life. Apart from the wondrous medicine, not a single supplement will ever work for you. But now he goes on. In verse 5, so for this very reason, because of all the wondrous life that is now in you, look at these words, make every effort. Make every effort. Each one of those words is very important. Make every effort. Take the supplement. Make sure you take the supplement every day and keep on taking the supplement. It's the supplement of your cooperative, responsive, dependent, joyful response to the divine life that is in you. And by the way, we need to tell you a lot, and we're going to tell you a bunch in the next 6 weeks. What are some of those efforts we make? Becky and I are going to do a workshop, not this Sunday, because we didn't think you'd come to it. But we're going to do it next Sunday, and really next Sunday, like it's part 2 of what the message is today. We're going to talk about what are those every efforts that the biblical writers are unanimous in telling us this is what you do in cooperative, dependent response to the wondrous medicine life of Christ. But Peter goes on and says, well, there's goodness, there's knowledge, there's self-control, there's perseverance, there's godliness, mutual affection and love. Eugene Peterson winds up having a wonderful description. He says there's, to your basic faith, I now want you to make every effort about good character, or every effort about spiritual understanding, alert discipline, passionate patience, reverent wonder, warm friendliness, generous love, which all these, just they start to fit into one another so very wonderfully. We drink the wondrous medicine called the life of Christ. And then with that, we make every effort.